A champion is bred from hard times, scarred mind standing on the ledge. The squad grind all time, victory in spite of opposition. Welcome to competition. You pick a side, I pick a side, they pick a side. Take a knee against abuse, they rather you die. Pushing through dark tunnels, trying to shed light. The fight is on the moment we enter the game of life. Get it right before the whole thing gone dead. Let's go ahead and take it there. Meet me on the edge.
Karim Zidan, thank you so much for appearing with us here on Edge of Sports.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave. I feel like it's a long time coming, given that you and I cover so many similar topics.
Absolutely. I want you to help make me smarter about what's happening right now at the intersection of the calls for a ceasefire and sports. So what are you seeing outside the United States in terms of athletes speaking out about Israel's war on Gaza?
So we're seeing it die down significantly now that we're nearly 40 days into the war, unfortunately. But early on, we did see a lot of Arab athletes in particular speak out almost immediately. We had an Egyptian swimmer called Abdurrahman Sameh. He immediately spoke up after actually winning a swimming championship. But what he did was he revealed that he's been getting death threats and intimidation, basically due to the fact that he's been speaking out in favor of Gaza and the Palestinian cause. Again, this is somebody who flat out said, "I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm not targeting anybody. I'm simply trying to raise awareness and show solidarity for Palestine." And he claims that because of that, he ended up receiving death threats. Another, probably far more notable name that you probably know here is Karim Benzema. Karim Benzema, one of the most successful soccer players in the world right now. And he was immediately one of the people who came out in solidarity with Palestine, said a very, very reasonable statement talking about how to reach a ceasefire, stop the killings, etc. And he was accused of being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood by actual French politicians. Leading officials in the government immediately accused him of being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is horrific Islamophobia to say the least. You know what I mean? So there have been some really complicated and difficult scenarios that really raises what I believe, Dave, to be extreme tribalism on both sides now, because you're really seeing it in the United States. You're seeing immediately after the awful attacks, the horrific attacks that took place on October 7th, you saw LeBron James, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and all these other U.S. leagues immediately released statements saying they stand with Israel. But in the month thereafter, those same organizations have not released statements calling for a ceasefire or showing any form of solidarity with Palestine. Instead, what we've actually seen is a lot of these leagues institute flag bans. And even they're trying to be so sneaky, even with the flag ban, saying that it's just generally a flag ban, banning all identifying flags. So that would count for other flags like LGBTQ plus flags, etc. But really, it's very clear to me, and it's no coincidence that this took place shortly after the attacks. So it's clear that even modes of free expression are being limited in U.S. sports when it comes to this topic. I can take this to one further extreme and tell you that in contrast to this sort of wishy-washiness taking place in mainstream U.S. organizations, what I'm really noticing is in the world of combat sports in the UFC, which is, it's well known for its controversy over the most part. You've had a lot of Muslim athletes there actually show lots of solidarity with Palestine. One of the organization's champions during an event in Abu Dhabi last month in UFC 294, his name's Islam Makhachev. After he won in his headlining fight, he actually draped himself in a Palestine flag and simply said, let's work towards peace here. I stand with Palestine and Palestinian solidarity. The UFC, which has been a proponent of, free speech supposedly and relationships with Donald Trump, etc., actually censored that from the YouTube broadcast. In the co-main event, I know, which is really the extreme example of hypocrisy, really very stark there for the UFC. In the co-main event, though, let me give you an odd, sort of absurd counterpart to that, is in the co-main event of that same event, there was another fighter, a Chechen Muslim fighter called Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev, after his fight, also successful, also won, he gave a post-fight speech in the octagon with Joe Rogan next to him, where he basically said, let's all work towards peace. This is what he said in English: is like, I don't want to see children dying. I want us to reach peace. And then he gave a second statement in Chechen. Now, once I was able to find the translation of that, I was really shocked here, because what the Chechen translation said, he directed it straight at Chechen warlord Ramzan Kadyrov, who runs the semi-autonomous Republic of Chechnya and is a really close ally of Vladimir Putin. He directs his words at Kadyrov and says, "Chief, I represent you. I want you to send me to Palestine so I can die with my brothers." So talk about two
Wow.
contrasting statements right there from the same person. In English, calling for peace. In Chechen, saying that he wants to go die with his brothers in Palestine. So honestly, there's
Amazing.
been a lot of examples of stuff going on. I'll give you one more before I give this back to you, Dave, which is on, you've had these Muslim MMA fighters responding this way. Let's talk about the tribalism of what the Israeli UFC fighters and MMA fighters are saying. One of them, his name is Haim Ghazali. Haim Ghazali is about 50 something years old now, so he's a retired fighter, but he's well known in the scene. He's referred to as the Israeli Batman because of this tattoo he has on him. He actually posted a photo of an artillery shell that he inscribed with the names of Muslim MMA fighters, the same ones that I've been listing: Khabib Nurmagomedov, Hamza Chimaev, Bilal Muhammad, who's a Palestinian fighter on top of that. He inscribes it with their names and a message beneath it saying, "This is for the rats." So
Oh,
there's some really horrific stuff taking place right now.
wow. It's so interesting that one side is calling for peace and the other side is calling people rats, I think, is its own story unto itself. I have some questions about MMA for you, but before we get there, there's also Anwar El Ghazi, the Dutch soccer player for Bundesliga, who lost his job. We just named maybe half a dozen people. Is that it? Is that what we're talking about? I can add Michael Bennett here in the States, maybe an Instagram post or two. I mean, because it does feel very shallow in terms of how people in the sports world are responding to this. So my double question for you is it in fact that shallow? And given the wellspring of athlete activism that we've seen in recent years, how do you explain that shallowness?
So I think in comparison to what's recognizable to US fans, sports fans, yes, it would be very shallow. I'd say that pool expands a little bit and gets a little deeper when you incorporate Arab teams and Arab athletes around the world. I'd say, for instance, especially in the first few weeks of the war, I regularly saw Egyptian football teams and its players showing extreme solidarity on the pitch. As a matter of fact, there were certain players who were sort of flashing this double peace sign that refers to this Palestinian cartoon called Handala. And this is a Palestinian cartoon of resistance, actually. So it was a very creative and non-threatening sort of protest, really. And you were seeing some of that across the Arab world, but it doesn't get the same kind of attention, unfortunately, right? Like when we talk about the media that we are consuming, for the most part, it primarily comes from a Western perspective. And if you're following that type of media landscape, well, absolutely, it's extremely shallow. Now, you tie that back to the extreme sort of athlete activism we've seen with regards to a variety of human rights concerns, right? And it's not just the athletes themselves who have been active. We've had organizations and sports leagues and corporations throw their weight behind these causes of human rights and the values that we're supposed to share and this sort of morality that we're looking towards. But it's very disappointing to see a lot of those same organizations actually either stand with the oppressor here and ask for more warfare and more bloodshed, which is extraordinarily disappointing, right? So I'll say this as an Egyptian, Dave. It's very difficult for me right now to look at what's happening in the world as someone who believes in human rights and believes in us fighting for this together, to see certain values and certain ideals are held at a higher standard than others, and that not all people are actually equal, is extraordinarily disappointing. And that's how it appears right now. I understand on an individual level, humans are better than that. But what we're seeing around us is quite disappointing.
Can you name some of those sports organizations that you feel like haven't stepped up, that you wished had stepped up?
Well, at this point, I feel like any of the ones I'd name, we could immediately call hypocrites because what have they ever really proven? Like, for instance, the ones who always, I actually wrote an article about this shortly after the war broke out, Dave, called "On War, Peace, and Sports," basically looking at FIFA and
Hmm.
the International Olympic Committee and questioning their claims of being peacemakers. For
Hmm.
years, you've heard Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, claim that FIFA can bring about peace. As a matter of fact, Infantino stated at one point just a couple of years ago during a visit to Israel that his dream is to see Israel and its Arab neighbors host the World Cup. And oh no, no
Jesus.
joke. This is exactly what he thinks, right? And you've had the same thing. Thomas Bach, I mean, has to interact with both, the Palestinian Olympic Committee and the Israeli Olympic Committee, and he's attempted to say that through sports we can bring about peace. I understand that this is sort of the Olympic motto, that there's this romanticized notion that sports can bring about change. I think sports can magnify changes taking place in the world. I do not believe that sports themselves can bring about change, primarily because we see the leaders in charge of these organizations are in the pursuit of profit, happy to work with whatever authoritarians or autocrats they see in their path. Right. And they work for their own stakeholders and shareholders. These
Hmm.
are not working for the interests of the people or for absolute peace. That's not true at all. The only reason they would ever seek out peace if it's an opportunity to host another event and to make more money. With
Hmm.
that selfishness as your primary goal, and this would apply to any other organization that claims to be representing human rights and speech, and NBA or whatever organization you can think of, as long as your primary goals are profit and meeting the goals of your stakeholders, you're never going to be representing the interests of the people. It's never going to happen.
Right, absolutely. Even when, like in the United States, 68% of the country is now for a ceasefire, 80% of Democrats. I mean, you can't find 68% of the people in the United States to agree on the color of the sky, and yet they agree on a ceasefire, and yet you don't see that reflected or represented in the sports world, either in the response of leagues or the response
Certainly.
of the overwhelming majority of athletes, who I do feel like are treating this entire issue like it's an electrified rod. And, like as the saying goes, they don't want to French kiss the light socket. And because that takes some courage to do that and to step out on this issue, because there are going to be repercussions.
But I certainly think that there's an element of willful ignorance involved here as well. I find that a lot of athletes, and this is not the first sort of cause that I find that athletes have ignored in the past. I've mentioned Ramzan Kadyrov earlier, and Ramzan Kadyrov, in the world of mixed martial arts, he's been extremely influential. You're talking about a warlord with a penchant for fighting, and he started his own, MMA fight clubs and all these various entities. And through that, at the same time, while he was sort of building up his reputation as this patron of the fight game, he was also purging the LGBTQ plus community in Chechnya. And every time I tried to raise this issue with the UFC or with fighters who were happily associating and taking money from this man, this is before him and his entities got sanctioned by the United States Treasury Department, they would regularly say, "Oh, I don't talk about politics. Oh, I don't know what's happening over there. Oh, I don't think about that. It's so far away. I'm just talking to the person. He seems like such a nice person." That is willful ignorance. That's the idea that, oh, this is such a foreign and exotic concept that I don't need to really understand it. You still hear, Dave, people say that about Israel Palestine. Oh, I don't really know what's going on. Are you telling me that 75 years after the
Mm,
initial Arab Israel conflict and you still have no idea what's going on? You have no frame of reference? How many wars, if you're a 30-something-year-old person, how many
hmm.
wars between Israel and Gaza have you seen? And
Hmm.
how do you still not know what's going on? How have you still not formed an opinion? And if you have stood by the oppressed in all these other examples, then why aren't you loudly and clearly standing with them now?
It's the right question. Some MMA questions for you, because you've written about this so extensively. Here's the two-parter:
Okay.
the MMA, UFC. Why, or how do you explain why fascists and authoritarians have found fertile ground in this particular sport? Why is that the case? And then, Do you think the issue of Palestine and the fact that fighters are speaking out about this, does that change the political balance of forces at all in this world?
That's a really great two-parter. So let me answer this as succinctly and as I possibly can here. I believe it depends first of all on the context. If you're talking about the rise of neo-Nazi fight clubs that we're seeing across the United States right now, that is a select group of neo-Nazis who have realized that they can lure in and attract disenfranchised youth across the United States and around the world to this sort of fraternity and this brotherhood where they could train in combat, train for a future conflict, train to, punch a liberal or do whatever it may be for these street fights and this ongoing conflict that they see that's coming. That type of radicalization has been extremely effective with combat sports as a tool. So that's why we're seeing, for instance, neo-Nazis utilize it. On the other hand, when we're talking about autocrats and authoritarians, when we're talking about a Donald Trump associating with the UFC, when we're talking about a Ramzan Kadyrov, right, doing the exact same thing, they view this more, and I wouldn't even call this sports washing because it's not even about distracting from human rights abuses. What this really is about presenting this alter ego of machismo, this toxic and ultra masculinity that is appealing to a certain segment of the population now, both in the United States and abroad. It has done wonders for people like Kadyrov. He is known as a strong man, and to his people, he is viewed as a thriving and successful leader because he's been able to take out the so-called terrorists that were a problem in Chechnya. He's been able to do all sorts of different things, and at the same time, he is the leader who has been able to bring characters like Floyd Mayweather, Mike Tyson, all these significant figures in the world of combat sports along him, by his side, walking shoulder to shoulder, right? That sort of effect rubs off on the people as well. So for Ramzan Kadyrov, he's definitely appealing. He's trying to create this strongman impression of himself, right? Even if it doesn't necessarily exist as a real person. Donald Trump has been doing the same thing. He recently had an interview with the UFC. It's a UFC podcast, and it was a sit-down video interview. And he was with one of the fighters and another presenter called Jim Norton. And I sat down to watch this thinking, okay, this is going to be Trump doing his usual narcissistic thing of being extremely selfish and turning the conversation around into whatever interests him or his political ideology. What was fascinating, Dave, was that actually he focused on just having a conversation about boxing. He talked about the time he spent with Mike Tyson, how he got into the boxing game and promoting that, how he got started with the UFC, and just talked about his favorite fighters, the favorite fights he's watched over the years. When you look through the comment section, what I was seeing on Twitter thereafter is that even people who didn't like Trump were immediately like, oh my God, have you ever seen another US president who has been able to sit down and have this type of normal conversation, feel like he's one of us? Trump is now also able to use this mystique of these sports that are counterculture, that are attractive to a lot of the apolitical communities in the United States and the apathetic youth of the United States, and be like, hey, look, I'm just a regular guy. I can sit here, have a conversation with you about any sports you like, and all these athletes that you love, I love them too. Right. So there's a great amount of reputation laundering and marketing that can take place through something like this. To answer the second part of your question, when it comes to the issue of Palestine, I think the UFC, as much as it is catering itself to this counterculture, far-right element of its fan base, this GOP Trump-style MAGA contingent of its fan base, as much as the UFC still has to walk the tightrope of understanding it is a diverse international sport that has had, LGBTQ plus champions. They've had multiple queer champions. They've had Brazilian champions. They've had black champions. The list goes on. It's one of the most diverse sports there is. And that includes having Dagestani and Chechen and Palestinian representatives in the organization, meaning their Muslim contingent, which are also champions and effectively stars in the organization, will also get a say. Right, so that's something the UFC has to figure out.
That's interesting, and I wonder if UFC fighters actually speaking about Palestine and speaking about peace, which runs counter to the toxic masculinity that you talk about. I wonder if that feeds into, as you put it, the editing process to keep some of these statements from reaching that apolitical audience. Because if you could see how it could work counter to the image they're trying to project if you have Donald Trump seeming like Mr. Ordinary guy, and then you hear him talking about basically, turning Gaza into a supermarket. And people hear that, but they see their fighters speaking for a free Palestine. That could also cause some very welcome cognitive dissonance.
Oh, it absolutely can. I wonder if the UFC leaves some of that stuff in to make sure it can lure in its fan bases elsewhere. I bet you the UFC understanding that at the end of the day, this is an American corporation that's trying to make as much money as possible, right? And for right now, the UFC has never been more successful or more profitable. Let's say they make well over $1 billion in revenue, and for the UFC, that's extraordinary, right? For Endeavor, the company that owns the UFC, it is their cash cow at the moment. So for an organization like that, they're not going to risk their fan bases where they can. They'll cater to them in a certain way with Donald Trump. Like in one pay-per-view, from one pay-per-view event to the other, Dave, you had a pay-per-view event in Abu Dhabi, which catered to sort of this more diverse Arab audience, bigger Muslim contingency. There's more Indians and Pakistanis in the stands. So the UFC event feels slightly different. The fighters that are on this card are different. There's a lot more Muslim fighters on a card like that, right? So, but then you move to the next event, which was in Madison Square Garden. And Dana White, the UFC president, emerges with who alongside him but Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, Kid Rock, and Donald Trump Jr., right? Like it's as if you're watching two entirely different sports or two different things entirely. It's bipolar. It's very strange watching the UFC do this.
Yeah. Wow. That's like a group of villains who the thing they have in common is abusing women. It's and you add Tyson and Mayweather to that. It's amazing the common thread that runs through about violent hostility towards women.
And they're all bonding over mixed martial arts now. When I got started doing this, Dave, I never would have thought that mixed martial arts would play such a crucial or such a interesting and absurd role in so many presidential elections in the United States so far, right? That it would be a weapon for anti-Semites and neo-Nazis, right? This is not something I anticipated getting into the sport, but it's very clear to me that there are these themes, these common denominators across this violent sport that makes it very appealing to people like this. And that's really disappointing. And the more I see sports fans ignore this, or sports fans tell me things like, oh, you don't really love this sport, you're just talking about this because you want us to hate it. Well, no, actually, I feel the same way about anybody who's ultra nationalistic and refuses to insult their government. Do you not understand what actually loving your country or loving a sport actually is? It means being able to critique it and criticize it when you think it's doing wrong and expecting better from it, right? That's what we should all be doing, is expecting better from ourselves, from organizations, from our countries, from our politicians. This all applies across the board.
You mentioned that you and I do similar beats and write about a similar intersection between sports and politics. However, a difference is that I don't have Roger Goodell or Adam Silver threatening to break my legs or anything like that, nor do I live in fear of them breaking my legs. But you, through doing this work, I mean, have you ever felt unsafe in doing the work that you do?
Yes, I most certainly have. I used to do a lot of work in Russia itself, actually, and I was an English commentator for a Russian mixed martial arts promotion at the time. But it was through having access to this organization and to Russia in general, because I was able to do a lot of trips across the border and across the whole country, really, that I ended up discovering Ramzan Kadyrov. And it was around the exact same year that I started working in Russia that he was forming his fight club. So talk about, a coincidence. For me, it was an opportunity to report on something that was so absurd, so strange, that nobody knew about at all. And it did help make my career, but at the same time, it was a curse, because I did get significant death threats that forced me to leave the country. I was told never to come back again. And I haven't been able to go back to a country that I really enjoyed being in, and there was a lot of work to be done still, that I thought. So I have faced death threats from Kadyrov, and honestly and unfortunately from others as well. I faced them from neo-Nazis who contact me on, Telegram and elsewhere. And some threats I take more seriously than others, but I've learned to, at this point, after nearly a decade of doing stuff like this, to just let it be like a water off a duck's back at this point. I don't know how else to explain it other than to say that to an extent, and it's very strange to say so, but it feels normalized, really. I'm used to now
Sure.
not, for instance, geolocating myself. I never post photos of myself while I'm still at a location. You'll only see me post photos of something after I've already left the place safely. I rarely report on, oh, I'm going to be here at this time, come see me, for instance. It's just something I've learned to accept is not something I can do safely at all. But the strange thing about all that at the same time, Dave, is I don't really regret anything I've done.
Hmm.
I'd say to people would be like, "Oh, you're so brave." I'd say, "Well, actually, I was young and stupid. I was in my 20s at the time, and I'm happy to admit that. You don't really think of consequences the same way. But I look back on it now with the benefit of hindsight, and I regret nothing."
Mm. So I wanted you on the show to speak about the international sporting dimension of resistance to the bombardment of Gaza. Before you go, and thank you so much for being generous with your time, is there anything we're missing or any part of this that you'd like to expound upon?
Oh, you know what? I will expand on one thing because not only did we not mention, but it's been a big focus of me from me right now is sort of the rise of Saudi Arabia in the world of sports.
Hmm.
But with regards to Gaza, Palestine, I think here's one of here's where Saudi Arabia, which has gotten so many compliments for all its successes recently in its unprecedented sports drive, I think it's actually working against it during this conflict, and I'll tell you why. Just a couple of weeks ago, Saudi Arabia hosted this really big super fight between former UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou and current WBO boxing champion Tyson Fury. Now, talk about the glitz and glamour here. You had a ring being brought up from under the ground. There was an opening ceremony for the fight. It was a huge showcase, and it was supposed to be the event that inaugurates Saudi Arabia's Riyadh season, which is this winter festival that's taking place every year in Saudi Arabia. And this was supposed to be the big one. They've been promoting it for months. They want the tourism, they want the attention. But just a few weeks before the event is when the war broke out in Gaza. And in Egypt, where I'm from, and in other Arab countries, to take on a state of sort of semi-mourning, people have canceled all the major events. Anything that would have appeared to be a celebration was canceled. The only place that didn't do so was Saudi Arabia. Only
Wow.
place. You had stars from across the world. You had Kanye West, you had Eminem, you had all these celebrities. You had The Undertaker, Vince McMahon, all these people were attending this boxing fight while 900 miles away, Gaza was being utterly bombarded. Now, for
Wow.
Saudi Arabia, which is trying to use sports to magnify this impression that it is emerging as a regional hegemon, right? It is jousting right now for regional supremacy from countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. But when it is the country that at the same time chooses to still go ahead with its event, this display of ostentatiousness instead of actually taking the lead on Gaza, I think was a major mistake for Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. And I'm very curious to see going forward if they will redeem themselves somehow, or if this is really a sign that Saudi's far more interested in itself, its economy, and Saudi nationalism than it is in sort of Arab solidarity or Arab identity overall. Because that's very different to the impression we've been given by Mohammed bin Salman. And to me, I find it interesting that Gaza has emerged as a nuisance to Saudi Arabia rather than a priority.
Interesting. And could that also be related to Saudi Arabia wanting to keep the door open to an alliance with Israel for the purposes of keeping Iran in check?
Certainly, and beyond just keeping Iran in check, Saudi Arabia has integrated itself into the global economy in a way that I don't think it can back out of instantly without completely collapsing MBS's, Vision 2030 master plan, right?
Hmm.
He's trying to build these alternative economic sectors and to divest from oil, which has always been Saudi Arabia's leverage. For them to do that, they simply can't withdraw from the global stage right now. They need to cooperate with all sorts of entities, including Israel. So this is a very complicated situation for Mohammed bin Salman. People always like to compare this to King Faisal from the 1970s, who cut off oil supply to the Western world because of its treatment of the Palestinian people and its support for Israel at the time. It was Saudi Arabia's own form of sanctions. The United States at the time threatened to bomb the oil fields. And King Faisal smiled and responded. This is what he allegedly said was, Saudi Arabia was once a country of goats and milk, and we're happy to go back to goats and milk. Now,
Hmm.
Dave, I don't think Neither Mohammed bin Salman nor the people of Saudi Arabia are willing to go back to goats and milk at all at this
No,
point.
not at all. Unless it was a solid gold statue
Oh,
of a
yes,
goat drinking milk. I don't think MBS has any interest in that whatsoever.
exactly.
Well, we're going to have you on in the future if you're willing to speak about Saudi Arabia at greater length. How can
Absolutely.
people keep up with your writing, Karim?
Well, Dave, I still do work for the Guardian and the New York Times. You'll find my stories regularly there. And other than that, I would really appreciate if people would subscribe to my newsletter slash media outlet, Sports Politica. You can find it at sportspolitica.news.
Tremendous. Karim Zidan, thank you so much for joining us here on Edge of Sports.
It was a pleasure, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.